The topic for today is original research articles. Today we're going to learn about how psychologists communicate and advance the science of psychology. That is accomplished through empirical research studies published in peer-reviewed journals. Just a little review before we begin. What is an empirical research article? Remember that empirical research articles are articles that report research, and the author of the article is the same person who conducted the research. When you're reading empirical articles, it's important to look for peer-reviewed journals. Why? Well, I mentioned previously that peer-reviewed journals are one consideration in determining that the research article is credible. What makes it credible? Consider the process for getting an article published in a peer-reviewed journal. When a researcher has written up their work, they will then submit their manuscript to a journal. The editor of the journal will then send that manuscript to 2 or more experts for review. The experts don't know who has submitted the manuscript, but they will critique the manuscript and then make one of 3 recommendations. Publish the manuscript as is, return the manuscript to the researcher for revisions, or reject the manuscript. When the editor receives these critiques, he or she will then make the final decision: publish, revise, or reject. What this means for you as the reader is that before you even get to read the article, at least 3 experts have critiqued it, which is why you can consider it to be credible. Remember that you need to specify peer-reviewed when you're searching for an article through a database. Databases provide more than just empirical articles. Now let's begin to consider an empirical research article. I want to explain to you the components of every APA-style empirical article. APA style does more than just tell us how to cite references. When an empirical article is written in APA style, it will always follow this same format. The article begins with an abstract. An abstract is simply a short summary of the research paper. Sometimes, when you are trying to locate articles that would be helpful to your own research, you would certainly look at the names of the articles, but then you would read the abstract. Be careful, though. When you're summarizing research, you can't do this by reading the abstract alone. Next comes the introduction. An introduction in an empirical article plays several roles. Of course, you will find that the research question or problem is introduced, as well as a review of previous studies that relate to the question or problem. Those previous studies provide the reader with the background to understand what has been found in previous studies. The introduction will also explain why the researcher is interested in studying this problem or question, and usually will end with the hypothesis for the research. It should be noted that sometimes you will find a research article that includes more than one experiment. The individual hypotheses for each experiment, as well as the rationale for multiple studies, will be included here in the introduction. The next section of an empirical article is the method. In the methods section, you will find information about the participants, the population and sample being studied, as well as specifics about the demographics of the sample. This is important since the sample and population tell you information about the generalizations you can make from this research. The materials is next in the methods section of the paper. Here you will discover any special materials that are used to carry out the experiment. This may include special equipment and the materials used to collect the data: questionnaires, surveys, instruments. Finally, in the methods section, the researcher will provide the procedure used in the experiment. This is a very detailed sequence of exactly what was done in the study. At this point, the information you've read would allow you to closely replicate the study, but there's more that is presented as part of this article. The results section of the article provides the reader with the specific data analysis. What statistical analysis was conducted, but most importantly, were the hypotheses supported or not supported? Remember that you don't prove a hypothesis. After all, this is just one study addressing this question or problem, and no matter how strong the evidence that supports the hypothesis, this is still just one study. It's important to replicate it. I do not expect that you will be reporting on the statistical analysis, but I do expect that you will be able to report if the data supported the hypothesis or not. The final section of this paper is the discussion. We have already read the results, but it is here in the discussion section of the paper that the author moves beyond the statistical meaning of the results and presents you with the conclusions that they have reached based on that data. The discussion may also include information that relates back to the previous studies that were reported in the introduction. Are the conclusions from this study consistent with or differ from those previous studies? It is also in the discussion section that the researcher will point out any limitations to the study. These are important to note. And finally, the researcher will end with suggestions for future new studies. Perhaps the results of this study has provoked new questions, and the researcher may suggest that these new questions be explored.